You know, when I look back, I always did paint and draw, you know, as a child, but it didn't register in my consciousness because I was very, you know, outdoorsy and I had lots of other interests. So it was other people who kind of pointed out when I was younger that I used to paint and draw a lot. It wasn't something I really noticed. But I did, you know, when I was at school, it would be my painting put on the wall, you know, that kind of thing. But again, it didn't really, you know, it didn't register with me. And then I suppose it was, it really happened when I was traveling. And when I was, how old was I? 20, I went to Australia for a year. And I worked my way around Australia. And a couple of times I sort of ran out of money, couldn't find work. And so I basically would paint t-shirts, sell them, paint murals, made a good contact, got myself a little studio set up, and before I knew it, I had a little business running. And it was such fun, you know, I really loved what I was doing, that I suddenly realized, I thought, wow, I'm actually, you know, sort of earning a living doing this, and it's fun, and I can do it. And so I decided when I got back to England that I would pursue it seriously. But I didn't really have the concept of a fine artist. You know, I didn't know what that was at that time. No one in my family really did that. So when I got back to England, I heard about this thing called graphic design. And to cut a long story short, I talked my way into a job and got trained up as a graphic designer. Worked doing that for 2-3 years, which I loved, and I think that was really good training because, you know, that's the sort of job where you come in the morning and you're given a brief and they say, okay, you've got 7 hours to come up with the goods, you know. So you have to, you learn how very quickly to get yourself into a zone, you know, to be productive. And to you know, block out, you know, all other things going on, and to have a process. And you learn, you know, silly things like how to use a colour photocopier and, you know, Photoshop, all those sorts of little things that help later on when you're an artist and you're doing your own little promo and your brochures and your this, you know, it just sort of helps. Anyway, I decided after sort of 2-3 years doing that, it was good, but it had a shelf life for me, you know. And so by that stage, England had become, we had a channel between us and France. And in my eyes, we were now European, and I was European, and I should be bilingual. I really felt very strongly about that. So I decided to go to France to become fluent in French. I'd already learnt French at school, but it was very limited. So I went to France, and I went to Paris, and whilst I was learning French, I thought, well, you know, I should earn money while I'm here. So I went out and street painted. So I actually made a few good rencontres. Made some good friends who were doing the same thing. And while I was street painting, I got my first commission. And it was a commission from a French plumber, and it was a Boucher painting. It was a very voluptuous painting of two gods, a god and a goddess. And I did this painting, and I basically had a postcard and I blew it up with acrylic paints. It came out very well. And that was my first commission. Then he commissioned me a second one, which was a Veronese painting, massive, great big painting. And then my dad came to Paris to visit me, and I think to encourage me, he went to the Louvre Museum, you know, for a tour on his own. And when he came back, he handed me a postcard and said, I'd like to commission you to paint me this postcard. And it was well, it wasn't what I was expecting. It wasn't the sort of, you know, painting that I thought he would have chosen. It was a Caravaggio. And I was so moved and I was so touched and flattered. I thought, okay, I'm going to do you a copy, and I'm going to do a really good copy. So I'm going to do it in oil, I'm going to get a permit, and I'm going to paint it in the Louvre, which is what a lot of the copyists do. So I went out, bought a set of oil paints, went to the Louvre, got my permit to paint this painting, and marched in there every day for a couple of weeks and tried to copy this painting. And up until that point, pretty much anything I tried my hand at, I kind of pulled it off relatively easily, because it's easy to copy, sort of a superficial image. But when you're in front of an original old master, it's a different story. You're not going to get anywhere near this painting without some sort of training. And as luck would have it, and this really was fortunate, in this very same room as the Caravaggio, it was a massive room, it was a big hall. There was a man also doing a copy of a Poussin, and his name it was Marino Barberio, and he turned out to be a teacher of old master techniques. And when I saw what he was doing, what he could do, and then what I could not do, I approached him and asked him if I could become one of his students, and he said yes. And boom, that started everything. So from that point on, I studied with him 2 afternoons a week at his atelier, and it was like an apprenticeship of old master techniques from sort of 15th, 16th, 17th century. We learned how to make our own pigments, brushes, varnishes, prepare our canvases. We did still life, we did landscape, we copied in the Louvre Museum to learn our craft. And that was it. That got me going. And it was there that I learned to paint my first portraits. And it was, if you like, it was a discipline. So you did still life, you did some portraiture, you did some landscape. And I loved it all, but the portraiture really grabbed me. And so I would ask my friends to sit for me. And I actually also, once a week, I had a portrait class at my house where my friends would come around and we'd draw each other. And it was only years later that my teacher said to me, of all the students that he taught, not a single one of them had taken up portraiture except me. Even he didn't take it up. So that sort of became my special interest. And the nice thing is, I did have a pretty good training in technique, which I still use quite heavily, even though sometimes if I want to do something a little bit more modern or contemporary or spontaneous, I'll go off piste. But the bones are always there. And depending on who I'm painting, I always, well, not necessarily with young children, but with young adults and adults, I always get a feeling of, when I meet them, I often get a sense of an era that I want to paint them in, or that they just, I recently painted a young man, and to me, I could just see him, in the forum in Rome, debating. I don't know why. I just, it was just something that I saw, and so that will affect the way I paint in terms of the background, the color choice, the technique, the brush strokes, everything. So, I hopefully I've got quite a large now sort of spectrum of skills and technique to draw upon, and sometimes it might be a little bit more impressionistic, and sometimes it might be quite classical. Sometimes something completely different altogether, so that's the exciting part. It's always different, and it's always still changing, lots still evolving. Now I have a couple of clients, and I may even just do a very simple line etching as a portrait of them, you know, because they inspire me to sort of go a little bit in that direction. So that was sort of, in summary, how I, you know, got to be where I am now. Yeah.